Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me in back? Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to talk to you today about ODS output, and I have a confession to make. I really love ODS. In fact, I had 3 presentations here. This is my third, and they were all on involved ODS. So, and this is one of my particular favorites. I really, ODS output is just an amazing tool there. So ODS delivers what used to be printed output in many convenient forms. And SAS packages that collection of items that come out of a procedure that most people want to see in a predefined order, AKA a SAS template. And then with tools such as ODS Trace, ODS Trace DOM, ODS Output, ODS Select, ODS Exclude, ODS Destinations, you can explore many buried treasures of procedural output and ODS output objects. And I hope to show how we can use these objects to get exactly the information that we want in exactly the format we want. And in this presentation, we'll cover ODS Trace and ODS Output in detail. So we want to learn how to trace, manipulate, and repurpose ODS output objects using tools such as ODS Trace, ODS Output, and SAS reporting programs. And we'll use those reporting procedures to extract precise information, coalesce data, and present in visually appealing formats. So in an era of data-driven decision-making, the ability to do this is really important. And so this is going to be a deep dive into how we can do that. We're going to create a SAS data set. That's my first step when I'm doing anything. This was originally, by the way, a hands-on workshop. And on my GitHub page, which I will highlight at the end, it's a complete program that will run all the exercises I'm going to show you and will produce all the output. But in order to do that, we have to have a data set. And I'm just using a data set that is based on one of the SAS help data sets that is available with any SAS installation. So sashelp.heart data set is based on the Framingham Heart Study. And it was selected to demonstrate the capabilities of ODS output. The data set contains both demographic and medical data, and additional elements that we added were group variable, ID variable, sample weight, et cetera, just for the purposes of demonstration. And some missing variables were also added. So this just walks through creating that SAS data set, create BMI from height and weight, et cetera, female and male binaries to use in regressions, and add some label variables. So next up, we're going to discuss the ODS trace statement, aka the Aparecium spell, which forces SAS to reveal its deepest, darkest secrets. Well, not really, but ODS trace is very illuminating in terms of what SAS is doing behind the scenes when it runs a procedure. So there are 4 basic concepts involved, and that is to identify or locate your ODS output objects. And this is done using either ODS trace or looking at your results window in whichever platform of SAS you're using. And number 2 is to analyze your ODS output objects and take a look at exactly what is in them. And then you want to manipulate those ODS output objects using SAS data steps, SAS options, et cetera, and then finally report on the SAS data set. And we're going to start out with the first element, which is how to figure out what is created. And the way that we do that is to use the ODS trace statement. And you make an ODS sandwich just like you would if you were creating HTML or RTF. And in this case, you're just going to say ODS trace on. The items after the slash are optional, but that gives you a little bit more information. And this output goes to the log. And so then you can run whatever procedure you want. If you want to do go out to a destination, you can put that out there and put up there, and that styles are there. And then you just say whatever ODS commands are in there, and then you just surround it with end it with the ODS trace off. And that label will then, in the log, will include the label path for the output objects in the record. And then you can use that label path anywhere that you can use a regular SAS path. So that allows you to access that output object directly. But there's another way to deal with that, but that's coming up next. So here we're showing how ODS trace we're going to run a proc contents, and I'm using order equals collate because options can make a difference in your ODS output objects. And then I have ODS trace on, ODS trace off. And first, we see the results window, aka the ODS output window, and that's showing the three outputs down on the far left there, and there's three different outputs. And you can look at the PDF, look for version 4 in the, if you click on my paper, the PDF will have this. It'll be a little easier to read if you're in the back of the room. So rest assured that you can actually see what's going on there. So that the print outputs that are created by the procedure are attributes, engine host, and variables. And that's what we see in the listing. And we can see here, this is the engine host information. In that you would see in your printout, that will be the top row when you in your ODS listing. And then next up is going to be the engine host. Engine host? Yes, engine host information. And then the next one is the variables. And so next we're going to look at changing things up a little bit. We're going to use a different option here. So we're going to do order equals varnum when we do our proc content. So it's not going to be sorted alphabetically. It's going to be sorted in creation order, or the order of the variables in the PDV. When we run it with that, same deal, ODS on, ODS trace off. And if we look at our results window, and the one that's below, we've got 3 data sets, but they're named different things. And what we see is that it's varnum instead of variables in there. So the ODS output object actually has a different name based on an option in the procedure. So, and here again, we see the three files, and the last one is going to be varnum. So that just sort of gives you an idea that things can change just based on options. Now we're going to run this. We can see the Next thing we're going to see is that external processes can also affect ODS objects. So running proc contents on a sorted data set is going to give you a different set of variable of little files. And so in this case, a new ODS object is created, and that is the sorted by object. And you can use this to display how your data set is sorted. And you don't get this information in proc contents out equals. You will not get that sort information there. This is the only place you will see it. It's present in the printed output. You have a little thing underneath saying that this data set is sorted by. But that information is often helpful, particularly if you're making code books or something like that, to have that information. So it's a nice little piece of information that you can get. Similarly, if a file is indexed, a new ODS object is created. And we're going to go, we run the same ODS output. And this time, we're going to get an index ODS output object down at the bottom. So, and as you can see, it can go to, it's like you can see all the different objects that are created. And this is what it looks like in the log. So the log equivalents, we just saw those results window, and the log equivalents will tell you things. The log tells you a little bit more. You'll get the name of the file, you'll get the label of the file, and then you'll get the template that it uses to produce the printed output, which you can access using that name there, the base.contents.indexes. And then you will have a path. And you can use the path and the template and the name. You want the name. So now we're going to talk a little bit about ODS select, exclude, and show. Has anyone used these items? They're very, very handy. They allow you to suppress the creation of either suppress the creation or select only a certain ODS output object or output object in general. And that actually has a sort of unexpected benefit. And that unexpected benefit is that, first of all, you don't see any of the output that you're not interested in. And the other part is that you don't create those files, the ODS output objects. And those ODS output object files are not work files. They're not in your work directory. You have to physically move them or reference them using the locations of them. But they do take up space in your job. So if you run out of space in your job and you can't figure out why because you're not doing too much, sometimes it's because you have a whole bunch of ODS output objects that are being stored in your job. And which go away. They're ephemeral, but you can save them. And that's what this is all about. So there are, you can prevent an ODS output object from getting created by using the ODS exclude statement. You can select it. You can also use ODS show, and that will come out in your log, and it will have information on what is shown. Up at the top, you can see it's ODS show, and it says parameter, what's in the exclude list, and we're excluding the parameter estimates there, and that will show in your log. You do have to look at your log to see that because it doesn't report it anywhere else. So now let's get into harvesting those ODS output objects. We've already determined that the ODS output objects for proc contents collate are attributes, engine host, and variables. These data sets are ephemeral, and they only exist in the SAS session, whether it's batch or interactive. Therefore, we need to preserve them as either work or permanent data sets. And the way to do this is to use an ODS output sandwich. The code in the red at the top saves our 3 ODS output objects. And you'll see that's the attributes, and you can name them the same thing, so you can have attributes equals attributes, but I recommend against that because you could overwrite things that you don't want to overwrite. So usually I put a number on them, or I will make a shorter name that, to deal with that. So that code saves the 3 ODS output objects as work data sets with the same name with 1 added. And once you have assigned those ODS output objects, close the ODS output at the end of your ODS sandwich. So now let's look at the result of the operation. After running the code above, we see that to the left, DM Explorer, that the SAS environment, which is libraries and folders, and clicking on the work library allows us to see the created work SAS data sets along with any other things that we have, like I had some formats up there and everything. So you can see everything that's there. So you can verify that you have created your output data sets. And I assure you that ODS output works as long as you have named the files right. So, and to the right, we see the ODS output objects created by the procedures, which is right there. And sometimes the names are different. So you have to really look at the log or just make sure that you have the right name for the ODS output object by looking at that output there. So the names are similar, and the names may be similar, but they may not always be completely the same, like some of the variables within the files may be named differently, et cetera. So, because you could right-click on one of those things in the results window and download it, and you will get different variable names than you would if you create the ODS output object. Just the way it works. So next we're going to investigate, and I did a little test print. So next we're going to investigate those work files. And in here, we're looking at the engine host work data set. And you'll notice that SAS provides you with both it gives you the label, and it gives you a character value and a numeric value. And the reason for that is SAS creates that character value because that's what it prints in your listing output. But you may not want that. You may want a comma in the middle. You may want a format. So it also gives you the numeric value. So if you want to do a custom format on that numeric information, you can do that. And that is really helpful when you're creating a custom report. So next is the work attributes data set. And this one is a little bit different because you can see that they actually have, there's label 1 and there's label 2. There's 2 variables on a row. So you have to look at your output data sets to sort of filter out. You need to sort of cherry pick. So you can just say, okay, I'm going to, one line I'm going to take label 1 and C value 1, and on the next line I'm going to take observations, and I'll take label 2 and the values for 2. So that's a very interesting thing about the ODS output objects. You really need to look at them to make sure you understand how they're constructed, and so how you can reuse them. And finally, we get the variables, which speak for themselves, and you get all the information that you normally expect to see from that. So we're going to do a little tiny use case just to show that plots are ODS output objects too. So you can actually save, do the same thing where you save these plots here. So at the top of this one, has anyone ever used the SGE command? You say ODS listing, SGE equals on. That will enable the creation of a editable graphic file. So it'll make a file that you can then edit later in the SAS graphics editor. So very convenient little tip. But anyway, so we go through ODS graphics, turn the graphics on, and then the second set restricts the output, and then we need to turn everything off again. And then when on the left side, you're going to see the results window again with SGE on. And you can also see on the right side, the plots have been created, and if you click on the plot images, you get redirected to the results window print. And you can open the PNG file that's created in the image editor, or you can also open in SGE and edit that image. So it's pretty cool. Another output use, and here's the log trace showing the information on the plots that are created. And again, you can use that path to access the plots that you've created, as well as outputting the actual graph. So next up, we're going to talk a little bit about Proc Survey Freak. So let's put the ODS output objects that we've looked at into action. So in my professional life, I spend a lot of time manipulating data to create files for analytic research and dashboards for government agencies. And there are standards to meet, and there are templates for reporting, and these ODS output objects can really help you get this worked. So first, we're going to look at Proc Survey Freak ODS output objects. How many people use Survey Freak? Does anyone? Yeah, good scattering. It is pretty much like Proc Freak, but it offers a lot of support for weighted, stratified, et cetera, sampling, complex sampling. And it also has some nice little features that we'll take a look at. So, procedural options make a difference, as I showed earlier with proc contents. And the ODS objects can also change. You get different ODS output objects created by different options, but the ODS output themselves can change with options as well. Just a reminder to always check your log and analyze your ODS objects. So here, we have two little procedures there, and we're adding the row option to Survey Freak table statement. And that gives you the row percent as well as the column percent, which is very handy, because I often have my analysts will ask me for both the column and row percent, and this way you get it in one fell swoop. So we've seen the different, and so we're going to add the row option to Survey Freak, and when we do that, we get same set of information, but so the same objects were created, exact same for the two different procedures. But then, when you get there, they've added 3 variables there for it's the row CV and the row percent and the row standard error. So you just have to be very careful with when you're adding options to make sure that you recheck the ODS output objects so that you know how to deal with that. And next up, we are going to look at how to create this with ODS output objects. And so it's like no touch. It's one of those things where you just write code. So how do we get to there? There are 3 fairly major steps. There is a lot packed into it, but I promise it's worth it. You'll be able to make changes to variables, formatting, et cetera, pretty easily with minor modifications to the code. The code to produce this is in the exercises on GitHub. So you can actually run it, and it's run on the test data set, and the code to create the test data set is also there on GitHub. It's one big program. So please feel free to download it and play with it. The first step is to basically combine ODS output objects for BMI categories and setting different table variables into a single database. And next, we're going to split the data set into different BMI categories and totals. Because the PROC Survey Freak output comes out with rows that are for each element and that give you a total roll. And the third one is we're going to massage the 5 different data sets, rename variables, and et cetera. And then we're going to prepare for a final ODS output, which is like adding reporting dummies. In this case, a reporting dummy would be something that would allow us to bold or shade in PROC report. As I said, I'm providing the full code on GitHub. So I wouldn't worry about taking screenshots because it's just going to move too fast here. But I'm just going to show you some of the code snippets that allow you to put together the thing that you're sending. So first up, we're going to look at okay. So what happens when you request in a frequency table crosstab, if you request a chi-square, what happens if you have a 0 cell? It doesn't create the chi-square. Well, it also doesn't create the chi-square ODS output object. So if you're expecting to see an ODS output object, and it doesn't encounter it, you're trying to use it in a report, you're trying to pull that in for a report, you're going to want to do something about that because it's going to fail because you don't have the object. So the solution to that is to take a little bit of code at the top there and to look and see if that file exists. And if it exists, then you're going to do some formatting and you're going to output it. If it doesn't exist, you're going to make a dummy copy and you're just going to say NA. So the information that you want to get is just not available. And that will go into your report and you won't get an error because you're going to chug through there and it's just going to say, okay, there was an empty cell and we have this. So that allows you to deal with that little piece there. And then next, we're going to set in some variables that are applicable to everything. And we going to do the different data sets, format and re-output into separate groups. Mainly going to rename this macro up here, mainly renames the variables to reflect the new column groups and resets the row variable. And then we just run this macro reorder the variables using retain, remerge the column data sets, and label for final output. And finally, we output to ODS Excel. So ODS Excel has a ton of options, and they really are great. In this case, the report that I showed you before, which I'll show you again, is embedding titles, and you can do footnotes too. You can color the tab. You can freeze the first column, and you can name the tab, and you can also use the default style here, but you can use your own corporate style or another style template. Finally, we output the data. And at the bottom there, you can see where we're putting in the code to highlight. That is using a non-printing variable, and that's going to tell it to highlight certain rows because that little flag is set. And again, you can see that the that embedded titles are up at the top there. The spanning headers are over there. And then a non-printing variable was setting the purple row there. And then the define statement and proc report can color the columns for you. And so that's all out of ODS output objects and a little bit of fun with proc report. So in conclusion, I would say that I hope you'll agree that SAS ODS output objects offer a lot of opportunities to enhance and customize your reporting. And I hope you will try it out and take advantage of it. And I think we have some time for questions.
Yes, we have plenty of time for questions. Any questions for Louise?
Okay.
When you did the proc contents output, what do you find? Let me see if I can phrase this. What do you find more efficient, those or the dictionary tables when you want to get that kind of information out of proc contents?
The what?
The dictionary tables. Would you rather use ODS trace to get the variable information and the metadata, the descriptor portion information out of a data set, or use the dictionary tables to do that?
You can use, there are those three tables. Any options you use will create additional tables. And so, for example, that's sorted by. You would just set that in, with, if underscore and underscore equals 1, then set it in. That's how I do it generally, to merge in the extra information. But again, it points out the need to really look at those ODS output objects so you know how to put them together. And I will say that I have, a lot of my analysts will ask me to do a logistic, and they say, and I want to see the odds ratios and the parameter estimates in the same thing. Well, those are two different ODS output objects, and they're not in the same order. So you have to sort of look at it and, because the parameter estimate starts with the top line, so you have to sort of go and set in start in the second record to get it to match up right. So you have to play with it a little bit, but I find it's worth it. Some people may think it's like, and once you have a system, if like a table I just showed you is something I was running when the COVID epidemic was happening. I was running sometimes twice a week the entire COVID, I guess it was adverse events. I was running it twice a week for CDC in the White House, and I could not fiddle around with it. So I set up the program, and I could just run it every time. And so it was a little bit of an investment up front, but then I was able to get what would have been impossible, a number of tables out doing that. So, yeah.
Thank you for your presentation, and I'm just wondering if you have any recommendations for to combine the ODS with the probe tabulate, especially for those complex like tables with multiple maybe groups.
There are some really good books, and there is a paper associated with it, and I have a lot of references in that paper. But there, anything by Cynthia Zender on, any of the big, I think SAS has a bunch of great papers. But if you haven't used have you used Lex Jansen before? Okay, Lex Jansen is a website that has all SAS papers from all SAS conferences, and it has a great search capacity. And if you go to www.lexjansen, then you will get access to all of that, and they have a special search for SAS papers. And just put in ODS output, and you will get more papers than you ever wanted to see. And actually they're really super helpful. And that's basically how I learn that's how I get my information. Is I go and I say, okay, and I actually wrote a paper on pulling the data from Lex Jansen and writing my citations for me, so I could do that. So anyway, I have a bunch of ODS output papers out there, but Cynthia Zender is one one author that has that I really used extensively. She just is a really great. She's a SAS trainer, so. But also if you just go to the SAS 9 table and the Innovation Hub, there'll be people there who can give you some really, and there's also a cheat sheet they give, just like that tells you all the ODS output capacities and stuff. So.
Any more questions for Louise? Okay, we'll go ahead and conclude our session then. Thank you, Louise.